over fields of green, remembering the faces, the moments unseen, the hands that built a dynasty, the vision in their eyes, echoes in the auction barn beneath an endless sky. This is the bullvine, turn the volume high, for the icons of the ages that never will die. From the show ring thunder to the quiet strength they knew, hear their stories now, coming right on through.
Welcome to the Bullvine Podcast, where we dive deep into the stories that shape dairy farming as we know it. I'm your host, and today we're exploring one of the most extraordinary chapters in Holstein breeding history. The story of a bull whose genetic influence didn't just change the industry, it revolutionized it. You're about to experience the rise of Braedale Goldwyn, from a newborn calf in a Cumberland, Ontario maternity pen to a genetic phenomenon whose daughters commanded million-dollar price tags and dominated show rings for nearly a decade. This isn't just another breeding story. This is about vision, patience, and the courage to build something that lasts generations. It's about the kind of decisions that separate successful operations from legendary ones. Whether you're milking 50 cows or 5,000, whether you're focused on production, type, or building the next great cow family, this story offers lessons that could transform how you think about genetics, risk, and legacy. So grab your coffee, settle in, and prepare to walk in the boots of the breeders who changed everything. This is the story of when lightning strikes. Let's get started.
You pull into the farmyard at 4:30 a.m., headlights cutting through the January darkness. The thermometer on your truck dashboard reads -12 Celsius. Your breath clouds the windshield as you shut off the engine, and for a moment, you sit in the silence that only exists in the deep hours before dawn on a dairy farm. Cumberland, Ontario. January 3rd, 2000. You walk toward the maternity barn, knowing that inside, Terry Beaton is already checking the overnight calving. The smell hits you first, that mixture of straw, warm bodies, and the sweet-sour scent of fresh birth that every dairy farmer knows by heart. Your flashlight beam catches movement in the far pen. A newborn calf, still wet, struggling to coordinate legs that seem too long for its body. Storm sun out of baler twine. Just another planned mating in the breeding book. Terry kneels beside the calf, his weathered hands guiding those trembling legs into position. You have no way of knowing that you're witnessing the birth of a genetic revolution. No way of understanding that this awkward, gangly calf will become Braedale Goldwyn, the bull who will rewrite the economics of dairy genetics, dominate show rings for a decade, and fundamentally change how the world thinks about Holstein breeding. But somehow, standing there in that barn, watching Terry's careful attention to this particular calf, you sense something. Maybe it's the way the morning light filters through the frost-covered windows. Maybe it's the quiet confidence in Terry's movements. Or maybe it's just that farmer's instinct, that inexplicable feeling when you know you're looking at something special. This is the story of when lightning strikes twice. Once in 1985, when a young breeder made a decision at an auction that would echo through generations. And again, 15 years later, when that decision manifested in a bull calf born on a cold Ontario morning, a calf whose genetic influence would spread across continents, reshape an entire industry, and create both unprecedented success and unforeseen consequences. You're about to experience the Braedale Goldwyn story, not as a distant observer, but as someone who lived through the revolution, felt the pressure of each breeding decision, and understood the weight of genetic legacy in an industry where one wrong choice can echo for generations. Welcome to the barn. Welcome to the story of when everything changed. You remember the 1980s dairy industry like yesterday because you lived through it. The decade when everything seemed to be changing at once, when computer-generated genetic indexes started appearing in breeding catalogs, when milk marketing boards restructured quota systems, and when feed costs began their relentless climb toward today's crushing prices. You're standing in your farm office, staring at your first LPI printout. Lifetime Performance Index, the Canadian attempt to quantify breeding potential in cold, hard numbers. The printout paper has those perforated edges, and you're running your finger down columns of numbers that promise to predict the future profitability of bloodlines that have been shaped by generations of intuition and experience. Your father, checking cattle in the adjacent barn, calls these computer indexes fancy guesswork. He trusts his eyes, his hands, the knowledge passed down through decades of selecting animals that milk well, breed back easily, and last longer than the competition. But the industry is changing. Feed costs that averaged $60 per ton in 1980 have climbed to over $100. Milk prices fluctuate with global markets you barely understand. The margin for error in breeding decisions is shrinking. The philosophical divide runs deeper than numbers. In one corner, you have the production-focused breeders, farmers like yourself, who need cows that generate cash flow, day after day, lactation after lactation. In the other corner, the confirmation enthusiasts chase show ring glory and the premium prices that come with breeding stock that catches judges' eyes. You've walked through barns filled with tall, angular cows that photograph beautifully but struggle to maintain body condition on high-energy rations. You've also seen shorter, chunkier animals that convert feed efficiently but would never win a banner at the county fair. The industry operates in parallel universes, the commercial dairy seeking profitability and the purebred operation pursuing genetic prestige. This is the world Terry Beaton navigates in the mid-1980s, a world where artificial insemination has democratized access to elite genetics, but where the sheer volume of breeding options creates paralysis by analysis. A world where a single breeding decision can cost a small fortune in semen prices, but where the right choice can elevate an entire bloodline. You understand Terry's position because you've been there. Standing in the breeding barn at 2 a.m, semen tank open, insemination equipment ready, holding a straw that represents months of feed costs, knowing that this single decision will determine whether the calf born 9 months from now becomes a profitable addition to your herd or an expensive disappointment. The Holstein breed dominates North American dairy farming, and for good reason. These black and white cattle convert feed to milk more efficiently than any other breed, adapt to management systems from tie stall barns to robotic milking facilities, and respond to genetic selection like no other livestock species. But that genetic malleability comes with risk. You remember the BST debates, the discussions about growth hormones and production stimulants. You remember watching neighboring farms embrace new technologies while others stuck with traditional methods. The gap between early adopters and traditionalists widens each year, creating winners and losers based on decisions that seem academic until they hit your monthly milk check. Into this complex, rapidly evolving industry steps a breeder who sees patterns where others see chaos. Terry Beaton doesn't just buy breeding stock. He invests in genetic systems. He doesn't just mate cows. He builds dynasties. And in November 1985, he makes a decision that will echo through decades of Holstein breeding. You're about to witness that decision and understand why it mattered so much. November 1985. You're sitting in the sale barn at the Sunny Lodge Farms dispersal, catalog spread across your lap, coffee growing cold in a styrofoam cup. The auctioneer's voice echoes off wooden rafters as lot numbers climb toward the evening's featured offerings. Around you, the who's who of Canadian Holstein breeding study pedigrees and whisper about bloodlines. The sale averages $6,839 per head. Serious money in 1985 dollars. You calculate quickly. That's more than most farms gross per cow in an entire year. But this isn't just any sale. Sunny Lodge has built a reputation for functional, profitable cattle that perform in commercial settings while maintaining enough type to compete in purebred circuits. You watch Terry Beaton across the sale ring. He's younger then, maybe in his early 30s, but already carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who understands genetic systems. His brother Mark sits beside him, and you notice how they communicate with subtle glances and slight nods. This isn't impulse buying. This is surgical precision. Lot 47 enters the ring. Sunny Lodge Elevation Jan, VG87 13 star. First lactation heifer, 4th generation, very good classification, solid pedigree without being spectacular. The kind of animal that makes sense on paper but doesn't necessarily quicken your pulse. You flip through your catalog notes. Good udder genetics, decent production potential, clean pedigree without obvious weaknesses. The bidding opens conservatively. You consider jumping in. This type of female fits your breeding program. But then you notice Terry's posture. He's leaning forward slightly, focused entirely on the auctioneer. This isn't casual interest. The price climbs beyond what most commercial breeders would pay for an unproven heifer. You watch other bidders drop out as the numbers approach the sale average. But Terry stays engaged, methodical in his bidding, never showing urgency, but never hesitating when the auctioneer looks his way. Final hammer, Terry beaten, Braedale Holsteins. What happens next reveals everything about Terry's approach to genetic building. Instead of loading Jan into his truck and heading home, he seeks out Carl Smith, the original breeder. You watch from across the parking lot as two men who have never met before negotiate a partnership that will reshape Holstein genetics. You learn later what they discussed: extensive flushing of Jan's genetics, embryo transfer programs, shared ownership of the resulting offspring. Most buyers purchase animals for their immediate use. Terry buys genetic systems for long-term development. The drive back to Cumberland that night reveals Terry's methodology. He doesn't think in terms of individual animals. He thinks in terms of generational compounding. Jan represents the foundation stone of a genetic pyramid that will be built with patience, precision, and unwavering focus on transmitting ability. Over the following months, you watch the Jan development program unfold. Hormone synchronization, embryo collection, recipient cow management. Technologies that are cutting edge in the mid-1980s but routine today. Each embryo represents a calculated bet on genetic potential, a commitment to long-term thinking that requires both financial resources and unshakable confidence in your selection criteria. The first daughter, Sunny Lodge Chief Vic, validates Terry's judgment. VG86 classification, 31 brood cow stars, numbers that translate to genetic consistency and commercial viability. But more importantly, Vic demonstrates what Terry saw in Jan, the ability to transmit quality reliably across different sire matings. You understand this process because you've attempted it yourself with varying degrees of success. Building cow families requires resources most farmers can't afford, patience that quarterly payment schedules don't accommodate, and an eye for genetic potential that combines art with science. Most operations focus on immediate returns, milk production that pays this month's feed bill. Terry focuses on genetic architecture that will pay dividends for decades. Vic to Aerostar produces Moon River, a modest GP83 classification, but carrying the genetic potential that matters more than individual performance. Moon River's departure to Japan as a young cow demonstrates both the international recognition of these genetics and the sacrifice required for long-term genetic building. Selling good animals to fund genetic development programs requires discipline that few breeders possess. But Moon River's legacy remains at Braedale in the form of her daughter, Braedale Gypsy Grand, VG80H37. This is where Terry's vision crystallizes into measurable success. Gypsy Grand becomes Holstein Canada Cow of the Year in 2003, formal recognition of her impact on breed development. But her real influence comes through her offspring: Braedale Goodluck, 4 LPI, Braedale Freelance, number 2 LPI, Braedale Spy, Braedale Rainmaker, bulls that dominate genetic rankings before anyone has heard of Goldwyn. You realize you're witnessing the development of a genetic locomotive. A female whose breeding potential exceeds her individual performance. Gypsy Grand doesn't just produce good offspring, she produces breeding animals that reshape the genetic landscape. The Braedale prefix becomes a trademark for elite genetics, creating market expectations and premium pricing for anything carrying the family designation. This is the foundation upon which lightning will strike. Not luck, not accident, but the inevitable result of systematic genetic building that began with a calculated risk at a dispersal sale in 1985. You're reviewing breeding records on a February morning in 1998. coffee steaming beside stacks of genetic catalogs and production reports. The numbers tell a story of incremental progress. Genetic gains measured in fractions of percentage points, improvements that accumulate over generations, but require faith in data that won't be validated for years. The pressure never stops in dairy farming. Feed costs climb relentlessly, now averaging $140 per ton for quality alfalfa hay. Milk prices fluctuate with global commodity markets that seem increasingly disconnected from farm gate reality. Your banker reviews loan renewals with questions about herd productivity, genetic investments, and long-term viability that hit closer to home each year. You understand Terry's position during these years because you face identical challenges. Each breeding decision carries amplified weight when margins shrink and costs escalate. The luxury of experimental matings disappears when every dose of semen represents measurable financial commitment. The temptation to focus on immediate returns rather than long-term genetic building becomes almost irresistible. Gypsy Grand's mating to Moglen Storm represents Terry's continued commitment to systematic genetic development, but also reveals the increasing complexity of breeding decisions in an industry where information overload creates paralysis by analysis. Storm brings durability and all-around performance to an already potent maternal line, but the mating also concentrates genes in ways that won't be fully understood until genomic testing reveals the risks hidden in pedigree structures. The birth of twins from this mating, Baylor Twine and Second Cut, demonstrates both the potential and the unpredictability of genetic systems. Identical genetics expressing similar phenotypes in different environments, both daughters achieving VG86 classifications with nearly identical production profiles. You witness genetic consistency that validates Terry's long-term vision while highlighting the role of chance in animal breeding. Baylor Twine remains at Braedale and continues the family development program. Second Cut moves to Gillette Holsteins and becomes the foundation for her own dynasty of successful offspring. Same genetics, different locations, both producing champions, the kind of genetic reliability that creates market value and breeding confidence. The late 1990s bring technological changes that revolutionize breeding decisions. Email communication allows instant access to genetic information. Computer databases track pedigree relationships with precision impossible in previous decades. Artificial insemination catalogs expand from regional publications to international directories, offering genetics from every major breeding program in North America and Europe. You remember the learning curve of incorporating new technologies into traditional breeding programs. Genetic evaluation systems become more sophisticated but also more complex. Linear trait evaluations supplement traditional classification systems. Daughter-proven sires compete with genomic-tested young bulls whose genetic merit estimates carry mathematical precision but practical uncertainty. The industry consolidates during these years. Smaller breeding operations merge or disappear. Regional AI organizations combine into national cooperatives. Competition intensifies for market share in genetic improvement programs. The pressure to identify and promote the next genetic breakthrough creates marketing strategies that emphasize revolutionary claims over incremental improvements. In this environment, Terry continues building genetic systems with patience that defies industry trends. While competitors chase fashionable bloodlines and promote flavor-of-the-month genetics, Braedale focuses on maternal line development that requires decades to fully mature. The strategy appears conservative compared to aggressive marketing of young sires with limited daughter information. Baylor Twine's first lactation performance validates Terry's genetic architecture. BCAs of 299 for milk, 397 for fat at 4.9%, 314 for protein, numbers that translate to commercial profitability and genetic transmitting ability. Her formal recognition as Holstein Canada Cow of the Year in 2007 provides industry validation of genetic systems that Terry has been building for over 20 years. You understand the emotional investment represented by these achievements. Decades of breeding decisions, financial commitments, and unwavering focus on genetic systems that require faith in data that won't be validated until years after initial investments. The recognition provides not just market validation, but personal satisfaction for systematic approaches that prioritize long-term results over short-term gratification. The mating of Baylor twine to Shormar James in 1999 appears routine in breeding records, but represents the culmination of Terry's 15-year genetic development program. James brings outcross genetics from another legendary Canadian bloodline, the Shore family's commitment to balanced, durable, profitable cattle. The combination of Baton's concentrated genetic firepower with Shore's proven durability creates genetic potential that exceeds the sum of individual components. You recognize this mating strategy because you've attempted similar approaches with varying degrees of success. Line breeding to concentrate desirable traits, followed by outcrossing to introduce hybrid vigor and prevent inbreeding depression. The theoretical framework appears straightforward, but practical application requires timing, resources, and genetic insight that few breeders possess. The pregnancy proceeds normally through winter months of 1999, one of hundreds of breedings on the Braedale program. No special attention, no heightened expectations, no indication that this particular mating will produce genetic impact that reshapes Holstein breeding worldwide. But you sense something building. Maybe it's the way Terry discusses genetic potential with increased confidence. Maybe it's the way industry professionals reference Braedale genetics with growing respect. Or maybe it's just the farmer's instinct that recognizes when systematic approaches reach critical mass and prepare to produce results that justify decades of patient development. January 3, 2000, approaches with no fanfare, no special preparation, no recognition that dairy history is about to change forever. You're driving to the feed mill on December 30th, 1999, listening to Y2K preparation reports on the truck radio. The new millennium brings uncertainty about computer systems, financial markets, and technological infrastructure that affects everything from milk payment systems to feed delivery schedules. Your operation, like thousands of others, has prepared for potential disruptions while hoping for normal operations. The dairy industry enters the 21st century facing challenges that will define the next 2 decades. Consolidation accelerates as smaller farms struggle with economics that favor scale and efficiency. Regulatory pressure increases as environmental concerns focus attention on nutrient management and water quality. Consumer preferences shift toward organic and specialty products that require production modifications and premium pricing structures. Genetic evaluation systems evolve rapidly during this period. Canadian dairy industries implement genomic testing programs that promise to revolutionize breeding decisions. Young sire programs expand as AI organizations compete to identify and promote genetic breakthroughs. International genetic exchange increases as breeding organizations pursue genetics from around the globe. You remember the learning curve of incorporating genomic information into traditional breeding programs. Genetic merit estimates based on DNA analysis rather than progeny performance. Accuracy levels that promise 70% reliability for traits that previously required daughter-proven evaluations. The ability to identify genetic potential in calves months rather than years after birth. The technology offers unprecedented precision, but also creates information overload that challenges traditional decision-making processes. Genomic indexes provide mathematical precision for traits that experienced breeders have always evaluated subjectively. Linear measurements quantify characteristics that previous generations assessed through visual appraisal and practical experience. Show circuits adapt to changing genetic trends during these years. Judging criteria evolve to reflect industry emphasis on functional traits rather than purely cosmetic characteristics. Classification systems incorporate new measurements for health, longevity, and production efficiency. International competition intensifies as transportation improvements enable global participation in major shows and sales. The economics of elite genetics change dramatically during this period. Semen prices for popular sires increase from $50 per dose to over $100. Elite breeding stock sells for prices that reflect investment value rather than production potential. Genetic insurance policies become standard protection for valuable breeding animals. You witness the transformation of genetic markets from regional exchanges to international commerce. embryo transfer technology enables global distribution of elite genetics. Frozen semen allows genetic preservation and international shipping. Online marketing platforms replace printed catalogs and regional sales as primary methods for genetic promotion and distribution. The pace of genetic change accelerates as information technology improves communication and evaluation systems. Breeding decisions that previously required months of research and consultation can now be completed in days or weeks. Genetic merit comparisons that relied on incomplete information now incorporate comprehensive databases with international scope. Scientific understanding of genetic systems expands rapidly during this period. DNA testing reveals genetic relationships and trait associations that traditional pedigree analysis missed. Molecular genetics identifies specific genes responsible for production traits, disease resistance, and reproduction efficiency. Genomic selection programs promise to accelerate genetic improvement rates while reducing generation intervals. But increased scientific knowledge also reveals the complexity and risks associated with intensive genetic selection. Recessive disorders emerge as breeding populations concentrate around popular sires. Genetic diversity decreases as successful bloodlines dominate breeding programs. The balance between genetic progress and genetic health becomes a central concern for industry organizations and individual breeders. This is the technological and economic environment surrounding Braedale Goldwyn's birth. An industry in transition, embracing scientific advancement while struggling to maintain genetic diversity. Competitive pressures that reward genetic breakthroughs while penalizing conservative approaches. Market forces that create enormous value for superior genetics while threatening the viability of conventional breeding programs. Into this complex, rapidly evolving industry steps a bull calf whose genetic influence will exceed every prediction and challenge every assumption about the relationship between genetic merit, market value, and industry impact. November 2004. You're sitting in your farm office at 6 a.m., coffee growing cold beside stacks of breeding catalogs and genetic evaluation reports. The monthly LPI listings have just arrived via email, a routine you've followed for years, but which never fails to generate both hope and anxiety about your breeding decisions. You scroll through the rankings, noting familiar names in familiar positions. Genetic progress appears incremental, measured in small improvements that accumulate over time. Your own breeding program shows modest gains, nothing spectacular, but steady improvement that validates careful sire selection and systematic genetic building. Position number 82 catches your attention only because it's an unfamiliar name. Braedale Goldwyn. You recognize the prefix but can't recall specific details about this particular bull. Another Braedale entry. Terry's program continues producing genetic merit at levels that earn industry respect, but this one hasn't generated the buzz surrounding some of his other releases. You make a mental note to research Goldwyn's pedigree and breeding potential, then continue reviewing rankings for immediate breeding decisions. November breeding season requires sire selections for calves that won't be born until August, evaluated until lactation, or proven until progeny testing completes its 3-year cycle. The faith required for breeding decisions extends far beyond most business planning horizons. The morning milking routine provides time to think about genetic strategies while your hands work automatically through familiar procedures. Each cow represents multiple breeding decisions: sire selection, timing, genetic goals, economic objectives that seemed logical when made, but now generate varying degrees of satisfaction or regret based on resulting offspring performance. Your breeding program reflects compromises between genetic idealism and economic reality. Elite sires command premium prices that challenge tight operating margins. Proven genetics provide reliability but limit genetic advancement. Young, unproven sires offer genetic potential but carry risk that farm operations can't always absorb. February 2005 brings the next LPI update with anticipation that has become routine over decades of genetic evaluation cycles. Most changes are predictable, bulls gaining or losing a few positions as additional progeny information refines genetic merit estimates. Occasionally, a bull makes dramatic movement based on exceptional daughters or disappointing performance, but these events are rare enough to generate industry discussion. You open the email attachment and scan the top rankings. The familiar names occupy expected positions with minor reshuffling that reflects normal variation in genetic evaluation systems. Then you notice something that makes you double-check the data. Position number 5, Braedale Goldwyn. A jump from number 82 to number 5 represents movement so dramatic that you initially suspect data entry errors. Bulls don't gain 77 positions in a single evaluation run without exceptional circumstances that generate industry-wide attention. You cross-reference multiple sources to confirm the accuracy of rankings that seem impossible. The phone calls begin immediately. Other breeders expressing disbelief, excitement, and urgent interest in accessing Goldwyn genetics before market demand drives prices beyond reasonable levels. AI distributors reporting sudden inquiries about semen availability from an unknown bull that has become an overnight sensation. Genetic evaluators explaining statistical procedures that validate extraordinary evaluation results. You understand the implications immediately. Genetic merit increases of this magnitude suggest transmitting ability that exceeds normal expectations for Holstein breeding. The jump from number 82 to number 5 represents daughter performance that validates genetic potential hidden in pedigree structures that experienced breeders should have recognized but somehow missed. The drive to Terry's farm provides time to process information that challenges assumptions about genetic evaluation systems and breeding strategies. How does an experienced breeding community overlook genetic potential that produces results dramatic enough to generate 77-position LPI improvements? What does this suggest about genetic selection criteria that prioritize proven performance over pedigree analysis? You find Terry in his office, phone pressed to his ear, surrounded by breeding catalogs and genetic evaluation reports. His expression combines satisfaction with bewilderment, the satisfaction of systematic genetic building validated by objective evaluation, but bewilderment at the scale of industry response to results he expected but never anticipated would generate such dramatic market reaction. Terry explains Goldwyn's genetic foundation with the methodical precision that characterizes his approach to breeding decisions. The maternal line development, spanning 20 years, from the original purchase of Jan through systematic genetic building that accumulated genetic merit in concentrated but predictable patterns. The outcross to Shormar James that introduced hybrid vigor without diluting accumulated genetic potential. But even Terry admits surprise at the scale of genetic evaluation results. Expected improvement? Yes. Revolutionary impact? No. The difference between systematic genetic building and breakthrough genetic events that reshape industry standards. The distinction between incremental progress and paradigm shifts that redefine possibilities for Holstein breeding. The market reaction exceeds all previous experience with genetic breakthroughs. Semen orders that exhaust initial availability within days of evaluation release. International inquiries from breeding organizations that normally develop domestic genetics rather than importing North American bloodlines. Embryo transfer requests that promise premium pricing for genetic access that seemed routine just weeks earlier. You witness the transformation of genetic commerce from regional exchange to international market overnight. Goldwyn's semen prices increase from standard AI rates to premium pricing that reflects scarcity and demand rather than production costs. The Braedale prefix gains recognition that extends beyond North American breeding circles to global genetics markets. The first Goldwyn daughters enter show competition during 2005 and 2006 show seasons, generating visual validation for genetic evaluations that seemed almost too good to believe. These aren't just daughters that classify well and produce efficiently. These are animals that redefine breed standards for mammary excellence, dairy strength, and overall balance. You attend shows where Goldwyn daughters dominate class competition with consistency that veteran exhibitors have never witnessed from a single sire. Not occasional winners, but systematic excellence that spans multiple classes, regions, and management systems. The kind of genetic uniformity that suggests transmitting ability that exceeds normal variation in Holstein breeding. The show ring success generates market momentum that extends beyond genetic evaluation results. visual confirmation of genetic merit that resonates with breeders who trust their eyes as much as computer-generated indices. Marketing appeal that attracts commercial breeders seeking competitive advantages and purebred operations pursuing show-ring success. The economic impact on Braedale operation exceeds all previous experience with genetic marketing. Semen sales that generate revenue streams independent of milk production. International licensing agreements that create ongoing royalty income, embryo transfer programs that command premium pricing for genetic access. But success creates new challenges that test management systems designed for conventional dairy operations. Genetic inventory management becomes critical as semen supplies face unprecedented demand. International shipping requires regulatory compliance and quality control procedures that exceed domestic marketing requirements. Insurance policies become necessary protection for genetic assets whose value exceeds traditional livestock valuations. You recognize both the opportunity and the risk represented by Goldwyn's success. The genetic breakthrough that validates systematic breeding approaches while creating market forces that could reshape Holstein breeding in unpredictable ways. The economic rewards that justify decades of genetic investment while generating pressures that could undermine long-term genetic diversity. By 2006, Goldwyn climbs to number 3 LPI, confirming genetic merit that initially seemed too dramatic to sustain. The progression from 82 to number 5 to number 3 represents consistent improvement based on expanding daughter populations rather than statistical variation that might explain initial evaluation results. The global genetic commerce surrounding Goldwyn creates precedents for Holstein breeding that extend far beyond individual bull marketing. International genetic exchange that previously focused on proven sires now embraces young bulls based on genetic evaluations that promise future performance. Market valuations that reflect investment potential rather than immediate production utility. You understand that you're witnessing the transformation of Holstein genetics from agricultural commodity to financial asset. The emergence of genetic markets that operate according to investment principles rather than traditional livestock commerce. The creation of genetic value that transcends immediate utility and approaches speculation based on future performance predictions. But beneath the excitement and opportunity, you sense developing tensions that could generate consequences extending far beyond Goldwyn's individual impact. The concentration of genetic improvement in single bloodlines that could reduce diversity across Holstein populations. The market forces that could drive genetic selection towards short-term profits rather than long-term breed development. The lightning has struck. Now you wait to see where it leads. You find yourself in the barn at 5:30 a.m., moving through morning chores with the automatic efficiency that comes from decades of routine. But your mind races with questions that have kept you awake for weeks. How do you manage success that exceeds every prediction? How do you balance genetic opportunities that could reshape your operation against risks that could undermine everything you've built? Terry faces these questions on a scale that dwarfs your experience. The Goldwyn phenomenon has transformed Braedale from a respected breeding operation into an international genetics enterprise almost overnight. The phone never stops ringing. Fax machines consume paper faster than orders can be processed. International shipping arrangements require expertise that extends beyond traditional dairy farming knowledge. You imagine Terry at his kitchen table before dawn, spreadsheets and genetic catalogs competing for space with coffee cups and financial statements. The same table where breeding decisions were made with careful calculation now hosts negotiations that involve international contracts and licensing agreements worth more than most farms' annual gross revenue. The success validates every assumption about systematic genetic building while generating pressures that threaten to overwhelm management systems designed for conventional dairy operations. Genetic inventory that seemed adequate 6 months ago now faces demand that could exhaust supplies within weeks. Semen collection schedules that accommodated regional markets now require coordination with global shipping and regulatory requirements. You understand the emotional complexity Terry navigates daily. Pride in genetic achievements that justify decades of patient building. excitement about opportunities that extend far beyond original expectations, but also anxiety about managing success that generates consequences extending far beyond individual breeding decisions. The pressure to capitalize on Goldwyn's success competes with responsibility for genetic stewardship that considers long-term breed development rather than immediate market opportunities. Each breeding decision carries amplified weight when genetic material becomes investment commodity rather than agricultural input. The breeding season of 2006 tests management systems with demands that exceed all previous experience. Goldwyn's semen allocation requires rationing systems that balance market demand against genetic distribution goals. International orders compete with domestic customers who supported Braedale genetics during development years. Premium pricing reflects scarcity and demand rather than production costs. You recognize the dilemma Terry faces with each semen allocation decision: maximizing immediate revenue through premium pricing versus building long-term market relationships through reasonable access. Concentrating Goldwyn genetics in elite breeding programs versus distributing genetic improvement across commercial dairy operations. The success creates expectations that extend beyond Goldwyn's individual impact. Industry professionals expect Braedale to produce additional genetic breakthroughs with similar market potential. Breeding advisors recommend Braedale genetics based on Goldwyn's success rather than systematic evaluation of individual genetic merit. Market forces drive genetic selection toward proven performance rather than innovative breeding approaches. The economic transformation of Braedale operation requires business expertise that extends beyond traditional dairy farm management. Genetic asset valuation for insurance purposes, international tax implications for global genetic commerce, investment strategies for genetic revenue that could exceed milk production income. Terry navigates these challenges with the same methodical approach that characterized genetic building programs, but the scale and complexity strain management systems designed for conventional agriculture. Success that seemed impossible now generates obligations that threaten to overwhelm the farming operation that created the genetic foundation. The show season brings visual validation for genetic evaluations while generating market pressures that complicate breeding decisions. Goldwyn daughters dominate competition with consistency that creates expectations for future performance. Visual excellence that confirms genetic evaluation results while setting standards that could influence breeding selection for decades. You watch Terry at shows, surrounded by admirers and customers seeking genetic access, handling attention with gracious professionalism while maintaining focus on genetic evaluation that extends beyond immediate market appeal. The balance between commercial success and genetic responsibility that defines ethical breeding practices under extraordinary circumstances. The evening chores provide temporary respite from constant phone calls and business pressures. Terry moves through familiar routines that connect him to agricultural roots while processing decisions that could affect Holstein breeding worldwide. The cattle that generated genetic breakthroughs continue requiring daily care that grounds extraordinary success in practical farming reality. You understand the internal conflict between celebrating success and managing its consequences. The satisfaction of systematic genetic building validated by objective evaluation. The excitement of opportunities that exceed every expectation. But also the weight of responsibility for genetic stewardship that considers breed development rather than individual achievement. Late evening hours in the farm office become strategic planning sessions that balance genetic opportunities against operational capacity. Breeding programs that must adapt to global demand while maintaining genetic integrity. Financial planning that incorporates revenue streams that didn't exist 6 months earlier. Management systems that must evolve to handle success that exceeds every prediction. The transformation from local breeding program to international genetics enterprise happens so rapidly that adjustment requires constant learning and adaptation. Skills that weren't necessary for conventional dairy farming become critical for managing genetic commerce that operates on global scales. Terry's experience during these months reflects challenges that few breeders face, but every farmer understands. How do you manage success that exceeds your preparation? How do you balance opportunity against responsibility? How do you maintain focus on long-term goals when immediate pressures demand constant attention? The questions have no easy answers, but they define the character tests that separate genetic breakthroughs from sustained genetic improvement. The difference between creating exceptional genetics and managing their impact responsibly across generations of Holstein breeding. You recognize that you're witnessing not just genetic success, but the human challenge of stewardship that comes with extraordinary achievement, the burden of responsibility that accompanies genetic influence that could reshape an entire industry. Success, you realize, carries its own unique pressures that test character as thoroughly as failure ever could. October 2008, World Dairy Expo. You stand in the Coliseum at the Alliant Energy Center in Madison, Wisconsin, surrounded by the electric atmosphere that builds all year toward this moment. The International Holstein Show represents the pinnacle of dairy cattle competition, where genetic theories face practical evaluation, where breeding reputations are made and lost, where the future direction of Holstein breeding crystallizes in show ring competition. The premier sire announcement carries weight that extends far beyond individual recognition. For 25 years, Regan Crest Elton Durham has dominated this award with consistency that defined an era in Holstein breeding. Durham daughters, profitable, predictable, durable, represented the breed standard that commercial operations could trust and purebred programs could build upon. But you sense change in the air. The first Goldwyn daughters to reach mature classification have redefined expectations for mammary excellence and dairy strength. These aren't just daughters that perform well. These are animals that establish new benchmarks for breed type and production capability. You've watched the progression through regional shows leading to this moment. Goldwyn daughters winning with systematic consistency that veteran exhibitors have never witnessed from a single sire. Not occasional champions, but class after class of animals that demonstrate genetic uniformity rare in Holstein breeding. The mathematics of show competition confirm what visual appraisal suggests. Premier sire recognition rewards the bull whose daughters accumulate the most points through high placings across all classes. The award requires not just exceptional individuals, but genetic consistency that produces winners across diverse management systems and regional competition levels. In the preparation areas, you observe the final grooming of an animal that represents years of breeding decisions, months of feeding and management, weeks of travel and preparation for this single day of competition. Each animal carries the hopes and genetic philosophies of breeding programs that stake reputations on show ring performance. Goldwyn daughters stand out even in this elite company. The mammary systems that classification experts have called architectural marvels. The dairy strength and feminine character that combines beauty with functionality. The genetic uniformity that suggests transmitting ability beyond normal variation in Holstein breeding. You recognize other breeders making last-minute evaluations of genetic potential based on visual evidence that will influence breeding decisions for years to come. Show ring performance that validates or challenges genetic evaluation systems. Competition that separates genetic theory from practical results. The crowd settles into bleacher seats with programs that outline months of breeding research and genetic analysis. Industry professionals who understand the technical aspects of genetic evaluation sit beside farmers who trust visual appraisal over computer-generated indexes. Commercial breeders seeking genetic advantages compete for seating with purebred enthusiasts pursuing show ring glory. The tension builds as class competition progresses toward premier sire announcement. Each Goldwyn daughter that places well adds points to totals that could end Durham's unprecedented reign. Each high placing confirms genetic evaluation results that initially seemed too dramatic to believe. You calculate possibilities while watching class after class of exceptional Holstein females demonstrate the genetic progress that has accumulated over decades of systematic breeding. the improvement in breed type and production capability that validates genetic selection principles while establishing new standards for future breeding programs. The judging process reveals genetic consistency that transcends individual animal excellence. Goldwyn daughters that share family characteristics while adapting to diverse management systems. Mammary systems that maintain uniformity despite different feeding programs and environmental conditions. Dairy strength that combines femininity with production capability. You witness the genetic principles that Terry Beaton has pursued for decades, manifesting in competition that validates systematic breeding approaches. Not luck, not accident, but the predictable result of genetic building that prioritized transmitting ability over individual performance. The judges' evaluations confirm what genetic data suggested. Goldwyn represents genetic advancement that exceeds normal progression in Holstein breeding. The kind of genetic breakthrough that happens rarely but reshapes breed standards when it occurs. The premier sire announcement approaches with anticipation that reflects 25 years of Durham dominance, competing against genetic evaluation results that promise revolutionary change. The end of an era versus the beginning of genetic influence that could reshape Holstein breeding for the next generation. You understand that you're witnessing more than show ring competition. This moment represents the validation of genetic systems that challenge traditional breeding approaches. The transition from proven genetics to emerging genetic potential that carries both enormous promise and uncertain risk. The microphone crackles as the announcer prepares to announce results that will validate decades of genetic building or confirm the continuing dominance of proven genetic systems. The moment when theory meets practical evaluation, when genetic revolution faces established breed standards. Your heart races as you realize that everything, the genetic building, the systematic breeding, the patient development of maternal lines, the calculated risks, and unwavering faith in genetic principles, comes down to this single announcement that will either vindicate Terry Beaton's life work or demonstrate the limits of genetic innovation in established breed populations. The moment of truth arrives. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice carries across the Coliseum with authority that commands complete attention from thousands of spectators who understand they're witnessing a potential changing of the guard in Holstein genetics. The premier sire of the 2008 World Dairy Expo International Holstein Show. You hold your breath along with everyone else in the arena. 25 years of Durham dominance hangs in the balance against genetic evaluation results that promise revolutionary change but require validation through practical competition. Braedale Goldwyn. The Coliseum erupts with applause that combines surprise, excitement, and recognition of genetic achievement that exceeds all previous experience with Holstein breeding. You find yourself cheering along with thousands of other dairy professionals who understand the significance of this moment. Not just a show ring victory, but validation of genetic systems that could reshape Holstein breeding for generations. The Premier Sire banner represents more than show ring success. It confirms genetic evaluation results that initially seemed too dramatic to believe. Goldwyn's daughters haven't just performed well. They've established new standards for breed excellence that combine production capability with visual appeal in unprecedented consistency. The statistics behind the victory tell the story of genetic revolution. 47 daughters placing in the top 10 of their classes, representing nearly 25% of the elite competition. The kind of single-sire dominance that veterinary geneticists explain requires transmitting ability that occurs rarely but reshapes breed populations when it appears. You watch Terry navigate the media attention with the same methodical approach that characterized his breeding decisions. Camera crews request access to Goldwyn. Reporters seek quotes about genetic revolution. Industry magazines compete for exclusive interviews with the breeder who ended Durham's 25-year reign. The Premier Sire victory validates genetic evaluation systems while demonstrating their practical application in show ring competition. Goldwyn's daughters haven't just performed well, they've established new benchmarks for breed excellence that combine theoretical genetic merit with visual confirmation. The victory celebration extends beyond individual recognition to industry transformation. You sense the shift in breeding philosophy as commercial producers recognize that elite type and production efficiency aren't mutually exclusive goals. The old divisions between show-ring genetics and commercial genetics begin dissolving as Goldwyn demonstrates their successful integration. The immediate impact on Goldwyn's commercial value exceeds all previous experience with genetic marketing. Semen orders flood Cemex facilities, international inquiries arrive daily, and embryo transfer requests promise premium pricing for genetic access that seemed routine just months earlier. You understand that you're witnessing the transformation of genetic commerce from agricultural commodity to financial asset. Goldwyn's success creates precedents for Holstein breeding that extend far beyond individual bull marketing to establish new principles for genetic valuation and international trade. The months following World Dairy Expo 2008 transformed Braedale from a respected breeding operation into an international genetics enterprise. You witness Terry managing success that exceeds every prediction while maintaining focus on genetic stewardship that considers long-term breed development rather than immediate market opportunities. The economic impact creates both opportunities and obligations that test management systems designed for conventional dairy farming. Genetic inventory management becomes critical as semen supplies face unprecedented global demand. International shipping requires regulatory compliance and quality control procedures that exceed domestic marketing requirements. The 2009 show season brings continued validation as Goldwyn daughters dominate competition across North America and internationally. Premier sire victories accumulate: 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, creating a dynasty of show ring success that spans 7 consecutive years at World Dairy Expo alone. You recognize the statistical impossibility of such sustained dominance. Single sire control of show ring competition for 7 years requires genetic consistency that transcends normal variation in Holstein breeding. The mathematics of premier sire recognition, based on cumulative points across all daughters in competition, demands not just exceptional individuals, but systematic excellence across diverse management systems. The Goldwyn economy reaches its pinnacle in 2009 with the sale of Eastside Louisdale Gold Missy for $1.2 million, a price that makes global headlines and establishes new benchmarks for elite dairy genetics valuation. The sale represents more than individual animal pricing. It demonstrates the investment potential of genetic assets that function as appreciating commodities rather than depreciating livestock. You understand the broader implications of genetic valuations that approach real estate pricing. The dairy industry has created a new asset class that operates according to investment principles rather than traditional agricultural commerce. The emergence of genomic testing during Goldwyn's peak influence provides scientific validation for genetic phenomena that seemed almost too dramatic to believe. DNA analysis reveals the genetic architecture underlying his transmitting ability, while exposing potential risks associated with widespread usage. The discovery of his carrier status for cholesterol deficiency, HCD, creates the first major challenge to his genetic legacy. Breeders who embraced Goldwyn genetics must now implement testing and mating strategies to avoid producing affected calves. Management complexity that previous generations of Holstein breeders never faced. The industry response to genetic concentration concerns becomes a defining moment for modern Holstein breeding. You witness the development of genetic diversity monitoring systems, breeding recommendations that encourage outcrossing, and educational programs that promote balanced genetic selection rather than single-sire dominance. These initiatives represent the maturation of genetic sciences from experimental application to systematic management of breed development. The tools and knowledge that enabled Goldwyn's success also provide the framework for managing its consequences responsibly. 25 years after Goldwyn's birth, you walk through dairy barns across North America and observe his genetic influence in countless daughters, granddaughters, and great-granddaughters that continue producing milk in commercial herds. His genetic signature appears in pedigrees from California to New York, from small family farms to large corporate operations. The The visual evidence remains unmistakable. Mammary systems that bear the Goldwyn stamp, dairy strength that combines femininity with production capability, and overall balance that reflects systematic genetic improvement rather than single trait selection. The genomic revolution that accelerated during Goldwyn's career now provides tools for genetic management that Terry Beaton could never have imagined. DNA testing at 6 months of age, genetic diversity monitoring across populations, and precise management of recessive disorders represent the technological evolution of principles that guided traditional breeding programs. You recognize how modern genetic selection applies Goldwyn's lessons through enhanced precision. The emphasis on balanced improvement, maternal line development, and long-term genetic building continues, but with mathematical accuracy that reduces guesswork and accelerates progress. The show ring legacy persists through daughters and granddaughters that continue winning major competitions decades after Goldwyn's death. R.F. Goldwyn-Haley's Supreme Champion victories in 2012 and 2014 extend the dynasty's dominance. Maya Goldwyn's 2013 World Dairy Expo Championship continues the tradition. The genetic consistency spans generations with reliability that validates systematic breeding approaches. The economic lessons from Goldwyn's career influence modern approaches to genetic marketing and valuation. Premium pricing for proven genetics, international commerce in genetic material, and investment-grade approaches to genetic asset management all trace their origins to precedents established during the Goldwyn era. But the industry has also learned restraint. Genetic diversity monitoring prevents single-sire dominance that could compromise breed health. Balanced selection indexes emphasize multiple traits rather than dramatic improvement in single characteristics. The goal remains genetic progress, but with sustainability principles that consider long-term breed development. You understand that Goldwyn's true legacy lies not in individual achievements, but in the demonstration of genetic principles that continue guiding Holstein improvement. The power of maternal line development, the importance of systematic breeding approaches, and the potential for genetic revolution through patient selection remain as relevant today as they were in 2000. You stand in a modern dairy barn on a quiet morning, watching cows that carry Goldwyn genetics in their pedigrees move through automated milking systems that didn't exist when he was born. The technology has evolved dramatically, but the fundamental principles of genetic improvement remain constant. Identify superior genetics, build systematic breeding programs, and maintain focus on long-term improvement rather than short-term gains. The Goldwyn story teaches lessons that extend far beyond Holstein breeding. The patience required for genetic building spans decades rather than accounting periods. The vision necessary for systematic improvement demands faith in principles that won't be validated until years after initial investments. The courage needed for genetic innovation requires willingness to challenge conventional wisdom and pursue approaches that others dismiss as impractical. Today's dairy farmers face challenges that Terry Beaton never encountered: climate change concerns, labor shortages, regulatory pressures, and market volatility that spans global commodity exchanges. But they also possess tools and knowledge that make genetic selection more precise and genetic progress more predictable than previous generations could have imagined. The genomic revolution continues accelerating genetic improvement while providing safeguards against the unintended consequences that accompanied Goldwyn's success. Genetic diversity monitoring, health trait selection, and balanced improvement indexes represent the industry's commitment to sustainable genetic progress. You observe young cattle in the breeding pens, animals that represent the next generation of genetic progress built upon foundations established by pioneers like Terry Beaton. Their genetic potential incorporates lessons learned from Goldwyn's success and the challenges it created. They embody the industry's commitment to continued improvement within frameworks that consider genetic diversity, environmental sustainability, and economic viability. The lightning strike of Braedale Goldwyn illuminated possibilities for genetic improvement that seemed impossible before his birth. His success validated systematic breeding approaches while revealing their potential consequences. His legacy continues through genetic principles that guide modern breeding decisions and technological innovations that enhance traditional selection methods. Every dairy farmer who invests in genetic improvement, every breeder who builds cow families with multi-generational vision, and every industry professional who applies genetic sciences to practical breeding decisions continues the work that began with a strategic purchase at a dispersal sale in 1985. The story of Braedale Goldwyn proves that genetic revolution remains possible for those who combine vision with patience, knowledge with courage, and systematic approaches with unwavering commitment to genetic improvement. His legacy challenges every generation of dairy professionals to think beyond immediate returns and build genetic systems that will benefit the industry for decades to come. Sometimes lightning does strike, but as Terry Beaton proved, it helps when you've spent decades building the right conditions.
The legacy of Braedale Goldwyn reminds us that in dairy farming, as in life, the most profound changes often begin with a single decision made by someone willing to think differently. Terry Beaton's investment in Sunny Lodge Elevation Jan in 1985, the patient building of a maternal dynasty, the courage to make breeding decisions based on genetic principles rather than popular trends. These choices echo through every barn where Goldwyn genetics continue producing milk today. As you head back to your own operation, remember that every breeding decision you make, every sire selection, every genetic investment becomes part of your farm's story. The question is, what story are you writing? This has been the Bullvine Podcast. If this episode resonated with you, share it with fellow dairy professionals who understand that great genetics aren't built overnight, but they're worth the wait. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join us next time as we continue exploring the innovations, controversies, and characters that define modern dairy farming. Until then, keep your boots in the barn and your vision on the horizon.
This is the Bullvine, turn the volume high for the icons of the ages that never will die. From the show-ring thunder to the quiet strength they knew, hear their stories now, coming right on through.